Good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, founders, entrepreneurs, and innovators. A very, very warm welcome to the CII Unicorn Summit, organized by the CII Unicorn Forum, titled Building the Nation, Indian Unicorns Contribution Unveiled. I'd like to begin this evening's proceedings by inviting Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General CII, to the dais to deliver the opening remarks.
I have no opening remarks to give, but I just wanted to welcome our chief guest of the evening and all of you, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. We have with us a very special person, Mr. Amitabh Kant. All of you in the recent past and still know him as India's G20 Sherpa, but he has worn many, many hats and many more hats to come, surely. But if we wonder why we are having the opening session of this Unicorn Summit with him, I just wanted to go back a few years, and I was just telling him going back to him about 2016 or so, when he was in the space which was initiating the startup movement, so to say. So we had approached him for a hearing, so to say, on startup and what could be the policy ecosystem around startup. And he gave a very patient listening to the CII team. And into 2016, we all know that the startup initiative was launched, and his hand in the movement is very, very well known. And he also spearheaded the Atal Innovation Mission, which really aimed at promoting this phenomenal culture of innovation and entrepreneurship amongst all of us here, especially from the unicorn segment. And it was so good for our startup and the unicorn team to really work on this. Special credit, of course, to Abhiraj and Rahul for really putting this together and making the CII work for the CII larger community, work for the startup and the unicorn ecosystem. So it is with that I wanted to not just draw the attention of you all, the Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to say that not just this relationship with Mr. Amitabh Kant and the startup and CII in the context of startups go back many, many years, but it is that we could also figure out in CII the type of focus and work we could do for our startups and later the unicorns, and which we continue. The ideas, much of it was his brainchild. But before we go into the formal part of the session, where I will request Abhiraj and Rahul to have a fireside chat with Amitabh, which is what he prefers, and also release the great report that McKinsey has done with the unicorn team of CII by the chief guest, and of course, very importantly, in his presence, give the awards and felicitations to the winners of the Unicorn Awards. But ladies and gentlemen, let's see a bit of what Mr. Kant's contribution has been to us over the years.
For the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, Mr. Amitabh Kant has been a constant guide, friend and support. Mr. Kant's innovative steps in Kerala for fisheries resonated with CII's empowerment activities. Mr. Amitabh Kant's commitment to empowering all enterprises and innovative initiatives brought multiple positives for industry. He inspired CII to take up a new initiative on startups and supported its startup ecosystem engagement under the Startup India mission led by him. Driving the Ease of Doing Business initiative, he addressed India's competitiveness, and CII worked closely with him to improve the business environment across the country. With his guidance, CII held the Make in India launch exhibition and organized multiple interactions for its progress. Working with CII, He ensured impactful outcomes in programs such as the Poshan app and mobile health ambulances. Inspired by his interest in rural development, CII strengthened industry efforts in India's aspirational districts. Mr. Kant's leadership was appreciated by CII during the COVID pandemic, when he led coordination with industry for mobilizing resources and ensuring successful logistics and relief measures. As India's G20 Sherpa under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visionary leadership, he also guided and engaged with the Business 20 led by CII as the Secretariat. CII worked closely with him to identify key policy advocacy areas and ensure consensus-based outcomes. CII salutes his commitment to India's growth and Indian industry's unstoppable rise.
A very warm welcome to you, sir. I'd now like to invite Mr. Bal and Rahul Garg to please bring and escort Mr. Amitabh Kant onto the dais, please. And I'd like to now request Abhiraj to kindly take the session forward.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very, very warm welcome to the CII Unicorn Summit, the first time that this is ever being held. I would like to extend a very special welcome to Mr. Amitabh Kant, India's G20 Sherpa, and very importantly, a beacon for the entire startup ecosystem in India ever since the startup ecosystem mushroomed more than 10 years back. He has a very busy schedule, but I can tell you over the years, whenever I've personally reached out to him for any help with respect to the startup ecosystem, he has always found the time at short notice and helped out. So thank you very much, sir, for joining us. I also welcome CII President, Mr. R. Dinesh, CII President Designate, Mr. Sanjeev Puri, and the Director General of CII, Chandrajit Banerjee, as well as Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, the founder and chairman of InfoEdge, and all the other delegates who are present here. Thank you very much for taking out time to join us today. In the year 2016, the Government of India launched the Startup India, Stand Up India movement. And in that year, CII also decided to give an important impetus and thrust to the startup ecosystem and started the Startup Council. I had the privilege of working in the Startup Council for the first few years, and a couple of years back, we established the Unicorn Forum, which I have the privilege of chairing, along with my co-chair, Rahul Garg, the founder of Moglix. Within the Unicorn Forum, we've had three major areas where we have focused on. The first is providing thought leadership to all unicorns, soonicorns, and other startups, and helping promote local entrepreneurship. The second is to foster an environment of positive policy change and work with the government on shaping policy across taxation, e-commerce, healthcare, health tech, fintech, etc. And finally, very importantly, to promote best practices when it comes to governance, ESG, and ensuring a sustainable and strong ecosystem for the decades ahead. In this regard, we felt that now that we're coming up to 10 years since the first unicorn in India, it was important to capture the impact that the startup ecosystem and the unicorns and soonicorns have created over the last decade, and also look forward to what is in store for us in the coming years and decades. We partnered with McKinsey & Company to do a very detailed report on the total impact, and I must congratulate McKinsey for doing very extensive and comprehensive work over the last 6 months, spanning across hundreds of consultations and multiple in-person detailed interviews, including a lot of secondary and primary research. I also want to appreciate Rahul Garg for taking the leadership on coming up with both the idea of the report as well as the larger summit. I would now like to first invite Senior Partner, McKinsey & Company, Mr. Ramdos Sitaraman, to make his presentation regarding the key findings of the report, after which we will be releasing the report and then having a fireside chat with Mr. Amitabh Kant. Ramdos, you're welcome.
Could I have the presentation up? Yes. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much to the CII Forum to give us the opportunity to collaborate on this extremely strategic initiative. I would say before we get into the findings of the report, it is very important to call out that this report is actually the voice of the ecosystem. Like Abhiraj said, we've had the chance to meet several of the founders, several of the investors, several of the policymakers, employees in the startups, consumers of startups, and many other people who have actually benefited from this ecosystem. And so this is bringing together, after 10 years of startups blooming in India, a comprehensive assessment of what this ecosystem has delivered, and equally importantly, what does it need to unlock to the next level over the next decade. If you were to look at it in terms of the last 10 years, I think there have been, stellar accomplishments. It's been incredible, the journey that has been traversed. 2-3 things that are worth calling out is India is now the 3rd largest startup ecosystem in the world. And 10 years back, I don't think this would have been in the imagination of many of us, right? And so the distance traversed is massive even in the global scheme of things. The other thing to note is that we were surprised at the amount of contribution that the startup ecosystem does to the GDP. There has been sort of a lot of work in figuring out what's the contribution, and it is about 10 to 15% of the incremental GDP over the last 10 years is powered by the startup ecosystem. And going forward, it's going to go only bigger. The other thing worth calling out is that there has been a capital infusion to the tune of about $140 billion over the last 10 years. And we are still getting started. We are going to broad base the capital infusion into the space. But $140 billion over the last 10 years is a staggering amount of capital that has fueled this innovation. And then I think if you were to fast forward to how the evolution over the next 10 years looks like, I think the headline thing that we are all working towards as an ecosystem is to contribute about $1 trillion to the GDP over the next 5 to 7 years. By 2030, in our assessment, this ecosystem has taken a target of contributing $1 trillion to the Indian economy. And that is basically at the center of how we are thinking about it. In addition to that, I think there are 3-4 aspects of how the next S-curve of evolution of these startups are going to look like. I think we are going to see a lot more of global leaders coming from India and sort of in some ways leading the categories at a global level. We've had a few, but I think we are going to see a lot more over the next 10 years. The second thing I'm incredibly, sort of excited about is the number of leadership talent that this ecosystem is going to spawn, which is actually going to help build the country in many ways. I mean, this is, if you were to put a personal context to it, the multiplier effect of this talent is humongous. A, they are building companies and creating employment. But B, if you look at it, there are a lot of startup founders, employees who are mentoring other startups. There are startup founders and employees who are actually angel investing in other startups. So this is actually, in some ways, building a very virtuous cycle of talent, which is entrepreneurial, tech savvy, and out there to, in some ways, grow the economy. And the last thing to call out is, if you were to look at the next S-curve evolution, we do see a lot of deep tech, IP-led startups coming through. As we see, sort of startup ecosystems evolve, you will find second-time, third-time founders, and you will see a lot more of deep tech startups coming in. And that's something that we are already beginning to see, but it's going to accelerate in a big way over the next 10 years. So that's, in some ways, the Unicorn 2.0 that we are going to see over the next decade. Now, if we were to double-click a little bit about what's been the impact, let's sit back and think a little bit about the dimensions of impact. In our perspective, there are 3 big areas of impact. There is a significant impact on the economic growth. There is a significant impact on the society, driving sustainability and inclusivity. And there is a democratization of consumption in a way that many other ecosystems have tried to do, but nothing comes close in terms of how digital ecosystems and startups have democratized consumption. So let's talk about each one of those in a little bit of detail. I think on driving economic growth, we already spoke about this. It's about 15% contribution to the incremental GDP over the last 10 years. We see this going up to 20% over the next decade or so. If you were to look at inclusivity and sustainability, there are factories that have been set up by startups which are 100% employing women. That's, sort of bringing in a new way of thinking. If you look at, sort of the democratization of consumption, on any given day, there are 8 to 10 million, I would say, food and grocery deliveries that are happening in under 30 minutes or so, which should have been unimaginable 10 years back. That is actually, in some ways, disintermediating a lot of the bottlenecks that were there, creating convenience at a level that we can only imagine, right? And so to that extent, there is a significant amount of customer convenience that is being driven by this ecosystem. Let's take another dimension. If you look at MSMEs, there are more than 5 million MSMEs who have been directly working with startups in different shapes and forms. And then the indirect number of MSMEs employed through startups is humongous. So in some ways, we are looking at a holistic impact from an economic standpoint, from a societal standpoint, as well as from a consumption or a putting the consumer at the center standpoint. Now, if you look at 2.0, where is the growth going to come from? So I think we've got to a great place, but we're going to climb greater heights. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the nuances of what's going to be different in the next 10 years. First is the mix of the startups. I think we've seen a lot of consumption-led startups, commerce-led startups. We're going to see a lot more of B2B startups. That's what you see on the top right of this chart. If you look at most evolved startup ecosystem, whether it is the Silicon Valley, whether it is Israel, you would see that actually B2B startups are a larger proportion of startups than B2C startups. In India, it's the reverse. And that's because we started from a place of driving consumption. But over the next decade, we're going to see a lot more of B2B startups. Second, we're going to see startups in places which have generally not seen so many startups. Let's take manufacturing as an example. We're just entering the semiconductor era for India. That's going to create a lot of opportunities for folks to create startups around that ecosystem. And there are many others like that where we are going to see new startup activity, which is going to power innovation. And the third aspect is about exports. We talked about how Indian startups are going to become global leaders. That requires a lot more of exports than what it is now. So from about $10 billion of exports today, we are looking at about $150 billion of exports over the next 10 years or so, right? So it's going to be a lot more export-led, a lot more B2B, and a lot more in areas which have generally not seen that much startup activity. And all of this together will get to about $1 trillion of GDP contribution by 2030. I think these need to be supported by some orbital shift. It's not going to happen easily, but I think there are 5 orbital shifts that we would like to highlight that we see happening, and we see the ecosystem working together to make this happen. I think the first thing is orienting to actually global competitiveness and global advantage. I think we have been endowed with a large domestic economy, but I think true innovation comes when we are globally competitive. And so to that extent, we are seeing in a lot of startup founders the hunger to actually be globally leading and not just lead in India. I think that's the first big shift. The second big shift is the IP-led startups. We are seeing a lot more of collaboration between academic institutions, the government, and sort of the startup ecosystem to actually take fundamental research and make that into big business ideas. If you look at the last 10 years, we've had a lot of ideas which are market consumption-led, and we're going to see a shift in actually a lot more of deep research, fundamental IP-led startups coming out of a lot of the collaboration with academia, government, as well as with the broader startup ecosystem. Third, I think there is going to be, and this is something which is encouraging, what I'd love to share is the conviction among the founders and the investors to raise the bar on governance. there is genuine conviction that this needs to set the bar on how well governed, sort of the industries need to be. And so we are looking to strive for a near zero type of compliance issues and drive towards a perfect governance ecosystem. And this comes a lot from self-regulation more than anything else. Founders taking it upon themselves and investors taking upon it themselves to actually bring together that level of governance. The fourth one is around, spawning corporate leaders or leaders in general coming out of this ecosystem. For an economy that's growing very fast, we need a lot of tech talent. We need a lot of entrepreneurial talent. What's the best source for it? It is our own startup ecosystem. We see at least 1,000+ leaders who are going to go and lead several leading institutions. Coming from the startup stints, having that entrepreneurial experience, having that tech-savvy experience, having a methodology of solving problems using a good combination of people, technology, and whatever is the latest, greatest toolkit that some of these startups use, right? And that's going to have a multiplier effect on the economy going forward. And the last point is actually broad-basing investor base. I think we've been led, if you look at the $140 billion of capital inflows into startups, it is predominantly led by international capital. I think that's going to change. Over the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot more of domestic capital coming in, and we're going to see a lot more of these startups going to public markets as well. Last, just in terms of a few recommendations for this ecosystem to take up. The ecosystem in our world consists of 3 main actors, and then there are several other folks around it. I think the first thing is actually the startup founders and startup employees themselves. So what can they do to take it to the next level? The second is actually investors who are integral to making this ecosystem happen. And the third is the policy makers and government who are creating the enabling infra to make all of this happen. And broadly, we looked at 5 sets of things that are going to be critical for us to get to all of this. I think the first thing to think about is capital. Any innovation requires capital. And so to that extent, how do we think about capital which is in a more broad-based fashion? The number of ideas there are mind-boggling. We won't go into all of them. There's a detailed report which you can all get to. But some of the ideas that were talked about is, can we create a fund which actually has all the founders pool in and create the next set of startups? Incredible idea, because they have gone through the journey. They can add a lot of value to, in some ways, budding entrepreneurs. Second one that is worth talking about is the overall governance piece. I think I already touched upon it. This is about self-regulation. There's incredible conviction to make this happen. The third thing to talk about is, in some ways, how do we think about innovation and talent? I take those two together. I think there is an incredible amount of collaboration that can happen in this ecosystem to up-level the talent, including looking at some of the best in the world talent to come into India. I think we would have really started to create the talent virtuous cycle if you're able to attract the globally best talent into the startup ecosystem here. And then last but not the least, a enabling policy around, how do we think about ESOPs and so on and so forth, which helps to get even more traction in a system which is in some ways already powering through. Put all of this together, in some ways, we are looking at leading institutions of tomorrow taking shape, and these 5 set of actions are going to power that and deliver that $1 trillion GDP contribution promise that all of us have taken as a commitment to deliver for the country by 2030. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ramdos and McKinsey and Company team for putting together this much-awaited report, the Unicorn 2.0, adding the next trillion. I would now like to invite Mr. R. Dinesh, Mr. Sanjeev Puri, Mr. Chandradeep Banerjee, and Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani to join us on stage for the release of the report.
And now I have the pleasure to invite and felicitate the Unicorn founders who are here with us today, and I'd invite each of them on stage and request Mr. Kant to kindly do the honors. Can you please come up here, please? The first Unicorn founder I'd like to invite is Mr. Saurabh Nigam, co-founder Elastic Run, commending Elastic Run's groundbreaking contribution to rural commerce and reshaping the landscape of rural economies. Ms. Smita Deora, co-founder Lead School. Lead School's journey exemplifies dedication, innovation, and commitment to transform education through tech-based solutions. Mr. Vasant Sridhar, co-founder Oxizo, lauding Oxizo for its financial solutions, driving growth for the small and medium enterprises in the country. Mr. Vibhav Hathi and Mr. Anurag Sinha, co-founders OneCard, commending OneCard's disruptive innovation in redefining digital transactions, setting a new standard of excellence for the financial sector. Louder applause is welcome. Akshay Gulati, co-founder Shiprocket, a trailblazer in the Indian logistics landscape with innovative technology and AI-driven solutions committed to optimize shipping process. And finally, Gaurav Agarwal, co-founder Tata 1MG, and Prashant, please join us. Lauding Tata 1MG's pivotal role in revolutionizing healthcare accessibility in India through its online platform, driving forward the nation's health and wellness agenda. May I request all the people and the founders that have been felicitated to please join us for a photo opportunity on stage. They can stand. 1 second. Thank you all. And now over to you, Abhiraj. Please take it forward.
Check. Congratulations to all the award winners. I now have the privilege of having a fireside chat with Mr. Amitabh Kant, who has been an inspiration to many young Indians in India. So your vision and your leadership has been pivotal to channelizing and propelling the entrepreneurial spirit and the startup ecosystem in India. Your unwavering commitment to fostering innovation and collaboration has helped shape this ecosystem over the last decade and more. And your stewardship as the Sherpa of the G20 Summit has been a beacon of hope and opportunity for startups worldwide. Once again, I would request all of you to join me in extending your heartfelt appreciation and welcoming Mr. Amitabh Kant ji. So my first question to you is, as Secretary DPIIT and then CEO of Niti Aayog, you were present in the government when the ecosystem was very, very nascent. Maybe the first unicorn had not even been born. Startup India and Stand Up India was still being formulated by you. Can you walk us through the thinking at the time within the government of how you were envisioning this ecosystem forward? What kind of impact were you envisioning this ecosystem could create? And 10 years forward, are you happy with the progress the ecosystem has made? Are there certain gaps that you see?
Thanks. Let me first compliment CII for this very unique initiative. And let me compliment all the young entrepreneurs and the unicorns who won awards today. So let me go back to 2015. I think it was, CII, which had Krish Gopalakrishnan was then the president, and he said, CB got in touch with me and they said that they want to do something on innovation. They could not make much breakthrough on startups, etc. So they came to me, and Chris and CB came to me. And then we started working on this. And subsequently, I went to the Prime Minister and said that we want to do the Startup India movement. And the Prime Minister made me do about 4 or 5 presentations. He had a number of questions. And his basic argument was that you have to make things very easy and simple for them. So we actually, because if you had got into the Inspector Raj, it would have been very difficult. So we made the labor department issue a circular saying that none of these labor laws will apply to startups. And then we had to work around a fund of funds, many things we did. And we went back to the Prime Minister the 5th time that I made the presentation, he finally agreed. And then we did this launch in January 2016. And we put only the startups with the Prime Minister. Nobody else shared this dais with him. And we had a whole day, number of top entrepreneurs had come from across the world. And it was a very fascinating launch, actually, that particular day. And it's grown over a period of time. It's grown because, since then, if I look at it, funding has increased 15x. The number of incubators have increased 9x. All that has happened. But we are number 3 in the startup movement, as was said in that presentation. But, we must be very clear that we have to aim to be the number 1 startup nation in the world. And I've just actually returned from Stanford, and I must say that the energy there is incredible. And we have to create even a greater energy for that. And there's no reason why anything should hold us back, because we've created a digital movement which is more powerful than anything else in the world. No other country has that kind of digital movement. And many of the startups which have become unicorns, they've become because they are national assets. Actually, unicorns are all national assets to us. And, because we built the digital identity, we created 550 million bank accounts between 2015 and 17. We seeded Aadhaar and the mobile number. And then you will see that a number of young unicorns, all this MobiQuick, Lending Card, Pine Lab, started doing lending because they could look at the payment history. And then you had a number of young startups like Zerodha, Grow, Upstock, who could take stock markets to tier 2, tier 3 cities, and they control over 30% of the stock markets. And then you have a number of young unicorns like GoDigit, Acco, who started giving insurance. So what India has actually seen is that fast payments, 30 seconds, we give an insurance policy in 1 minute, all on the go, on the mobile. And that's why even a company like Jio could acquire 450 million customers in 10 months' time. Because, the cost of acquisition of a customer in India has fallen from about $150 with a lot of paperwork to less than $1 in India. That has been the transformation of India. But we still have a long way to go. We must aim to be the #1 startup movement in the world. And that would require us a lot of effort.
Thank you, sir. Follow-up question to that, sir. If we look at ourselves today, we've traversed the last 10 years, we've reached a certain milestone. We want to be the leaders in the world in terms of innovation and growth, but equally importantly, as an ecosystem, we also want to be leaders when it comes to governance, ESG, leaving a better planet for the next generation. What would your advice be to startup founders who are listening in as to how they can think about holistic and sustainable development for India and the world at large?
I think my advice to all startups would be focus on corporate governance, focus on corporate governance, and focus on corporate governance. That is really the key. Because a startup which has gone on to become a unicorn must go on to become a big company in the future. That should be the ambition. And that can only happen if you have good governance, if you have proper audits, if you have a good CFO, if you have all the norms of good governance. Without that, you will not be able to grow. You will collapse because you've done innovation. Most startup entrepreneurs are all innovators. They are top-class innovators. And therefore, in the quest for great innovation, in the quest for great disruption, they lose out on corporate governance. It's very important to have the best, the finest young people on good CFOs, good auditors, all that put in place as you grow and expand. That's very critical, otherwise you'll land up into a debacle. And the key to India's success of becoming the #1 nation of startup is our ability to do good corporate governance, and #2, to ensure that Indian insurance companies, Indian pension funds, Indian large families, Indian large companies all invest in our startup movement. India cannot grow on the back of foreign money coming in all the time. India's startup movement must be driven by India's financing.
Sir, thank you for enlightening thoughts, and I have had a privilege as a startup which also works with manufacturing, seen you in different forums where you have encouraged revolution like EV and so on and so forth. So I would love to ask you how you perceive the future, particularly as we saw in the report, the B2B becoming a very significant portion, and startups not only limiting themselves to the consumer world, but thinking about disrupting many of the so-called traditional sectors of manufacturing or playing a role in exports, so on and so forth.
So I've been a great believer that, the deep tech has to be driven by India's startups. And deep tech requires that India's opened up many areas. India's opened up, the Prime Minister himself opened up the space sector. He opened up the geospatial sector. He opened up the drone sector. All these sectors have been opened up. We've now put a huge emphasis on artificial intelligence. This new cabinet note which has been approved of 10,000 crores. Imagine you're going to put GPUs in many colleges, universities. You'll have high computing power. No other country has the data which India has, the vast amount of data. And you need young people to do algorithms. So to my mind, the future lies in our ability to get into many sunrise areas of growth. Look at EV, look at battery storage. We need disruption in all these areas. Look at green hydrogen, look at a range of quantum computing, look at AI, and all these startups have to be driven on the power of AI. AI will become critical. That will be fundamental to the startup. It will be the foundational technology on which you will grow and expand. And therefore, all this is critical. My belief is that manufacturing, deep tech, all this is critical. It requires a lot of patient capital. And India should, like we created a fund of funds for startups, a 10,000 crore fund of funds for startup, we should really, the country together with the private sector should think of creating a $5 billion fund for, you need patient capital. And therefore you need to create a fund of funds. And fund of funds will then support a number of venture capital funds to do due diligence and support young deep tech startups. That is important in the long run.
So as a closing remarks, I would love to have, we recently had Women's Day and a lot of women entrepreneurs starting to come into the startup sector as well. Any of your closing remarks and ambition, vision you would want to set for women entrepreneurs and how the ecosystem can continue to attract them?
So, 50% of our population is now women. You can't grow. If India wants to be a $10 trillion economy and wants to be a $35 trillion economy by 2047, you can't grow without women. And women to be in leadership position, and that's why in G20, we convinced everybody in the world that it has to be women-led development. And in the case of startup, it has to be women disruption startup movement. A huge amount of emphasis has to be paid. And today you had one lady entrepreneur getting an award. Next time, Sibi, you must have 10 women entrepreneurs getting awards from here. I mean, women are outperforming men in every single walk of life in India. Every competitive examination from 10th standard to the IAS, women do better than men. My own college, St. Stephen's College, when I graduated in economics honors, it was a male bastion, all male bastion. There were no girls. By the time my daughter passed out, 81% of the students were all girls on merit. And the principal said that if this college has to remain co-educational, you have to give 10% extra marks to boys. Otherwise, there'll be no boys in the class. So, and later I discovered that in many colleges of Bangalore, they actually give 10% extra marks to boys to remain a co-educational college. So, women are doing much better than boys, and I think in the next 4 to 5 years, you'll have a huge amount of disruption from women entrepreneurs, and they'll do remarkably well in many areas. I mean, many areas, including defense. I mean, look at Vrinda Kapoor. She does remarkably well in a defense startup. So many startups you'll see will be driven by women, and they'll do far better than all of you, Abhiraj.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your enlightening words. I now request Rahul to deliver the vote of thanks.
Sir, thank you a lot for sparing time and spending this time with the CII Unicorn. And every time I hear you, I think I get more motivated, excited about what is the possibilities that exist for startup in this country. I mean, you have set a new vision of becoming the #1 startup ecosystem in the world, which I think every time I've heard and I felt that you have set an ambitious goal, it becomes true. So I believe it will become true in the coming times. And you have, as one of the finest policymakers, really been inspiring us both in terms of the G20 presidency and the continued success as the Sherpa. Your candid insights and comments we have well received. Many of the founders at the event, I'm sure they continue to remain charged up with your exciting words, both on the role that startups will play in deep tech, in the women startups of the future, and continue to go global. With this, may I invite Mr. R. Dinesh, CII President, to present a memento to Mr. Kant.
ladies and gentlemen, it is, once again, can we have a loud round of applause for Mr. Amitabh Kant? It is now my privilege to invite Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, founder and executive vice chairman of InfoEdge, to come and share his thoughts with us. Sanjeev, all yours. Thank you, Sanjeev, for joining us. It's a privilege. You're the OG of our ecosystem.
That makes me feel really old.
But let me first start by asking you, you've seen this ecosystem over 3 decades. You've seen the ecosystem when the word startup did not exist in our lexicon and the word unicorn certainly did not exist. How do you look at the last 3 decades, particularly the last decade? Has it met your expectations? Has it exceeded your expectations?
Well, I think many things have changed. बहुत बदलाव आया है. There is now risk capital available. It is now, you see, India was always an entrepreneurial country, always, even during license permit entrepreneurial. But typically, prior to liberalization, most entrepreneurs came from business families, business castes, business communities. They were entrepreneurs very often by inheritance. India's middle class has this huge quest for financial security. So the Indian middle class parents would tell their children, study hard, you have nothing to inherit, clear the entrance exams, get the marks, get into good colleges, get into the IIMs, do whatever, clear the IAS exam, get a good job at the end of it. And then, so we were trained to be employees. We were not trained to be entrepreneurs. We were trained to be risk averse. I think that has changed. So when I quit my job in 1990, I had roughly 5 years of work experience. I had done an MBA. I was an oddball, one of the very few in my class at IMA, right? And most of my classmates couldn't figure it out. That why has he quit a good job in a multinational? What is wrong with him? He's messing around with his career. He was doing so well. And 10 years later, in the year 2000, just before we raised venture capital, just before, I was financially probably the worst off guy in my class. Okay. And people would talk about me and say, my batchmates, when I was not listening, when I was not there, yeah, he has ruined his career. What a bright guy, but he has really messed it up. I think that has changed. It is now socially acceptable for young people from middle-class families to actually pursue entrepreneurship. And that's the biggest change. Because suddenly, parents don't feel embarrassed to say, hey, my son's doing a startup or my daughter's doing a startup. And it's okay. Second is, when I quit my job in 1990, if you started a business, we wouldn't call it entrepreneurship then, if you started a business, and after 4 or 5 years, if it wasn't doing well and you wanted to come back to the corporate sector in a large company, your career was over. You were regarded as a failure. And that experience was not valued. Right? So there would be a glass ceiling of middle management to your career. And if you wanted to come back, you would then say, okay, fine, let me go to the Middle East, let me go to Africa. To that kind of situation. Today, if somebody has entrepreneurial experience, 4 or 5 years, 3 years, and you want to come back to a large corporation, it's valuable experience. It is, my God, this guy can do 360 degrees. He can look at finance, he can look at operations, he can look at sales, he can look at whatever. Okay, and that's a big change. So suddenly it is desirable, aspirational, kosher to try and do a startup. And it's okay. Now, why is this important? It's because if you go to the IITs and IIMs and speak, I've been there several times, and I ask a question very often, how many of you are from families that you would regard as middle class? Roughly 80% of the hands go up. So India's brightest kids are from the middle class. India's hardest working kids are from the middle class. So your best talent were being employees, not at least some of the best talent are becoming entrepreneurs. So when you put your best talent into entrepreneurship, you will get some remarkable results. And that's important. Yeah. And these are the kind of guys, and girls, who often get VC funded. You don't see too many next generation from business families getting VC funded. So this marriage of capital, this marriage of talent, this marriage of, hey, entrepreneurship is now aspirational, has led to this huge change, huge change.
I'll ask a follow-up question and then Rahul will ask a couple of questions as well. So, we tend to operate in extremes in India sometimes. It's either feast or famine. 2021, we were best thing after, that's going to happen to the world. And the last couple of years, there's been a lot of negative sentiment around governance with a couple of examples. If we just step back, you've been someone who's probably been more focused on corporate governance than anybody else out there. What is your view on governance, ESG, next few years ahead for the ecosystem?
Yeah, let's separate the two, governance and ESG. Okay, let's just focus on governance. So I think governance begins and ends in the founders' heads. We have seen that the best boards, the best auditors, the best systems and processes can all be bypassed by a determined crooked founder, right? All be bypassed. We've seen it, and I won't name the companies, but we all know what, and I'm talking last 2 decades, not just now, right? So it begins and ends in the founder's heads. The founder has to want to be honest, has to want to run a clean company, has to want to build a reputation that is durable and clean. And then you surround yourself with people and processes that enable you to be well governed. Okay? Now this could be a board, this could be an audit committee, this could be auditors, this could be accounting practices that are not very aggressive, right? This could be whatever. This could be a habit of transparency and disclosure, of giving bad news early, of telling the truth, right? So all those things stem from what's inside the founder's head. And I think that is really key. I mean, it's okay to not be a unicorn if it means that you have to window dress your numbers to get that valuation. It's okay. It doesn't matter. Maybe you'll become a unicorn 2 years later. It's okay. So postpone your ambition and be clean. It's fine.
Maybe I'll ask some closing remarks from you, Sanjeev. I think it's interesting. We have seen a journey where Indian...
Sorry, 1 second. I want to comment on this unicorn thing.
Yes, please.
यार किसी ज़माने में $40 का होता था 2008 में, तो यूनिकॉर्न बनने के लिए 4,000 करोड़ वैल्यूएशन चाहिए थी, राइट? अब 82-43 का हो गया. I don't know what today's exchange rate is, but so to be a unicorn, you need an 8,200 crore valuation. Yeah, but लेकिन उनके लिए तो डॉलर चेंज नहीं हुआ, डॉलर रहा है. Okay. Our market is in India, our revenue is in rupees. We want to be a unicorn in dollars. So these international comparisons are dodgy. I think we may already be a bigger ecosystem than we regard ourselves. Sorry, tell you.
No, fantastic. I think.
So by the way, the first time InfoEdge hit $1 billion valuation was in 2007. At that time, the dollar was 40 rupees, and we were valued at 4,400 crores. Okay. Although technically we're not a unicorn because we were listed, but people still count us as a unicorn.
Fantastic. So I think the last 10 years, Sanjeev, you have seen, while there were many international companies who also came, many domestic companies have really given them a run and have shown that the Indian startups can really win in the consumer market. And now the aspiration is going global and thinking AI, where I think both the size and scale in dollar terms increases because you're starting to think like decacons or like $hundreds of billions of capital going into Gen AI. What would be your vision as a closing remark for the ambition you want to set for the startup ecosystem for next 5 to 7 years, both in terms of global disruption and role in Gen AI across the world?
So listen, once upon a time, Infosys was a startup, it still was a startup, and they went global because their market was global. And they went global out of India. They didn't have to change domicile overseas, right? So Indian companies have gone global earlier and have excelled. In fact, they excelled so much that all the global majors came and set up, development centers here, right? So yeah, people have done that earlier. You're not the first, and I think it's great, right? But fundamentally, you've got to understand that markets like the US, they're larger markets, but they're also more expensive to operate in. They carry greater risk, right? And if you're building a consumer product for the US, it's going to be very hard to sit in India and succeed. B2B, yes, possible. But even B2B, very few have actually made it. So understand the risks well before you do it. It's useful even in B2B to actually get profitable in India, and on that profitable base, then expand overseas. But I can't give a one-size-fits-all solution, right? But I mean, I can't imagine you having launched in the US to start with, at least. So it sounds great. Understand the risks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev. Thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Sanjeev Bikhchandani.
We are going to start with the next session right away. So please do remain seated. We'll just change the setting on the stage and carry on with the next session. Probably seat you in the middle of the Okay, so now I think we're ready to start with the session. And do I have your permission to start, ladies? As we delve deeper into the future of the startup ecosystem, it's time for our next fireside chat on Unicorn 2.0, adding the next trillion. We are privileged to have with us esteemed speakers who bring a wealth of experience and insights to the table. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished speakers for the session, Mr. R. Dinesh, President CII and Chairman TVS Supply Chain Solutions, an epitome of innovation and success in the logistics sector. Can we have you here, sir? Mr. Sanjeev Puri, the visionary leader of ITC Limited, a conglomerate known for its pioneering initiatives and sustainable practices. Mr. Sanjeev, Joint Secretary at the Department for Promotion in Industry and Internal Trade, bringing invaluable perspectives from the policy-making realm. And moderating this esteemed panel, we have Mr. Rahul Garg, co-chairman of the CII Unicorn Forum and founder Moglix, who will guide us through this insightful discussion. We also have the privilege of having Mr. Ajay Bahal joining us for this session. You are here already. Come on. Abhiraj, sorry, my mistake. My apologies. Yes.
Firstly, thank you, Dinesh, Sanjeev, for joining us for this session and encouraging all the startups and unicorns who are present today, as well as some of the investors and delegates from the embassy as well. I am glad to be moderating this session with such a diverse experience, ranging from logistics to running one of the largest conglomerate, as well as supporting the ecosystem of startups as part of the DPIIT. Just to reiterate some of the stats that we talked about in the report, the 100 plus unicorns created, 300 plus unicorns is the ambition for the future. We are expecting $1 trillion worth of GDP contribution in the coming years from startup. It's an audacious goal that has been set for startups, but we as startups are always used to audacious goals being set for ourselves, and then hopefully over-delivering on many of those goals. This report also highlighted one of the aspects that it is very important that the unicorns of the future are also well supported by domestic funding, which is an important topic as part of the CII National Council that we talk about. The importance of governance as this ecosystem continues to become extremely large. And last but not the least, but continue to remain responsible, whether it is in terms of sustainability, whether it is in terms of continuing to build the talent to fuel this unicorn ecosystem. So I'll start with Dinesh. There has been, I think in the last few weeks, firstly, heartiest congratulations to you for inaugurating the TVS Mobility Open Mobility Network Platform by the Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. I want you to talk a little bit about the center and how you are envisioning this center to play a role in supporting micro enterprises and supporting the vision of providing employment.
Thank you, Rahul, and let me add my congratulations to both you and Abhiraj for the successful conduct or ongoing successful conduct of this event, and also bringing out the good work which all of you do other than creating value for the shareholders, right? So that's, I think, a very important point which you have highlighted here today. And in fact, the reason I'm mentioning that specifically is that has great relevance to the center and what I think we were attempting to do with regard to actually highlighting the true value, which I think we can bring both from, I would call it the unicorns, as well as those who are associated with this sector. Actually, if you look at the success of India, or the competitiveness of India, that is built on the micro and small enterprises who are not really looking at the return on capital employed as a metric, but who are looking at that as a business livelihood for themselves, for generations which work with them and create value across the stream. So both as CII and TVS, I think the view was, how do we actually work with them to make sure that they are ready for the future? And the readiness for the future is on three fronts. First and foremost is with regard to the transition to the utilization of digital infrastructure and the digital ability to build their own businesses, especially considering their size and scale. Second is with regard to future skills. Third is with regard to being ready for the sustainability transition, which also is a big task for many of these small and micro enterprises. So as part of this effort, the idea was to work and create the future-ready enterprises work with the people, work with the owners, work with all of those who are associated with this sector, building up their ability to be competitive in the growing future. So I think it is to sustain that growth, sustain the competitiveness of India, and most importantly, if I can say so, because you did, the data mentioned was that more than, I think 30 or 40 million MSMEs had been touched upon, 50 million.
50 million MSMEs.
50 million had been touched upon by the unicorns who have so far done so. So I think in a way it is relevant to today's unicorns also, or the future unicorns, to make this sector competitive and participate in that growth. The final comment I will make is to, also one of the ideas is to bring this ecosystem together rather than leave it open.
No, fantastic, and thank you for supporting the center. I think it is definitely many of those will become part of one or more of the startup ecosystem as well. I'll move to Sanjeev, who I think DPIIT has been a big cheerleader of the startup ecosystem, and both from a policy making perspective, but also continuing to provide platform for them to showcase their capabilities and solutions. So Sanjeev, you saw that Unicorn 2.0, there's a bold ambition that startup founders are committing towards, and this is not possible without having that continuous encouragement, whether it is the Gen AI, a very large area that is on our way. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how are you thinking about the DPIIT and startups continuing to collaborate to make this mission happen.
Thank you, Rahul. We at DPIIT are very happy to know that unicorns are ready to become decacons. And it is not about the valuation per se, but this shows the success of the industry, that so many of our entrepreneurs are becoming successful in terms of valuation, both from IPO level or from the investment from all other sources. We at DPIIT are very much committed to startup ecosystem, and recently I would like to bring to your attention that till now government was collecting information only regarding recognized startups which were being looked after by the DPIIT, but now we have envisaged a Bharat Startup Ecosystem Registry, which will be a searchable registry in which all components of the ecosystem will be there. We will be needing unicorns to mentor our startups, and also for unicorns it will be invest in the upcoming startups. As all of you would be aware that success of Google is attributed to a large extent due to the startups in which they made investments. So it is a win-win situation for everybody. We will be having all incubators there, we will be having venture capitalists, all kind of constituents of ecosystem will be there, and I will take this opportunity to state that we will be focusing on manufacturing incubators. India has like the success stories of digital, fintech, but unfortunately we have very few incubators which are promoting manufacturing, and this would be our goal, and we are soon coming up with deep tech policy, and this is something which will drive the Unicorn 2.0, and for which we have sought suggestions from the industry, and it is being finalized. So if there is any kind of suggestion that should be passed to us, and we will be forming a policy which is which encompasses good practices for all the components.
Fantastic, and great to hear the encouragement continuously and forward thinking in terms of what more can be done from the startup ecosystem, and particularly manufacturing, because that's close to my heart. And I know Sanjeev is already nodding because manufacturing is very close to his heart as well. So next I would ask Sanjeev Puri, you have been leading one of the largest conglomerate in manufacturing for several decades. And I think the two topics that got raised in today's context is how does domestic funding continue to be fueled by from some of the large corporates in the country, as well as the thought process of how do Indian startups can continue to participate, engage early on with many of the larger manufacturing companies, and how can they get the encouragement? Because yes, capital is one problem, but getting customers early on is a very important goal for startups as well.
Thank you, Rahul. And first of all, let me congratulate all of you for the amazing success of India in being the third largest startup ecosystem. I think having over 100 unicorns in such a short period of time really makes all of us very proud. And is the first time that I am actually in a panel discussion been asked a question by a startup founder. Rather, in my own company, periodically we invite startup founders, and we have it online. So it's the most widely attended conversations we have, and there is a rush for people to opt to be moderators. So it's interesting to be on the other side. But coming to let me talk about really the second part. As far as the funding is concerned, if I look at it from a corporate standpoint, see, funding is normally a corporate would go for funding in areas that are strategically aligned to their business models, right? Otherwise, we are not a funding house per se. There are other constituents who do it. Now, startups, I find, play an enormous amount of role as far as corporates are concerned, and it's a synergistic relationship. So let me put it into two parts. One is that we are seeing a lot of role being played in improving the competitiveness of enterprises per se. And second is also opening up newer opportunities for enterprising. And the other dimension is also helping startups really scale up. So if I was to look at the first part, which is enhancing competitiveness, so again, two parts. One is being able to do things more efficiently, things that we were doing earlier. So we had a challenge, for example, in forecasting in emerging newer channels of sales. So ultimately, a startup made it better for us that traditional algos did not work. Climate change is a big issue. I want to know what is going to happen in my hotel and factory 10 years from now. How frequently would floods come? Or what are the risks in this place? Is it floods? Is it something else? So a startup has a climate risk modeling algorithm. So they provide the input for us much in advance so we can start mitigating it. And then startups, and I'm also happy to see, Elastic Run here, and the part of the award here, we work very closely with them. Reach for us in certain parts becomes cost inefficient. So we collaborate to reach such markets. And in turn, I think when we collaborate also, it provides an opportunity for the startups to fine tune and test out the model. Then startups also help us to address unsolved problems. We want to, ideally when I'm putting inputs in agriculture, can I remotely sense what's there in the soil? So I don't put excess water. Water is becoming a precious resource, so remote sensing. Before we give advisory to farmers, can I pick up the soil and put it in something and get the soil test results and give the advisory instead of sending it to one lab far away, and 1 month later the results will come. So it's no the time, because of the time lag it becomes irrelevant. So we work with a startup where instantly in a few minutes you get the results on a mobile, it goes into the algo, and all the solutions come out for the farmers. Let me go to the other part. How is it creating newer business opportunity for us. I think the ecosystem of startups for the last mile delivery, for example, helps companies like ours participates in the D2C space. The ITC e-store, our own D2C. It also helps us develop newer types of products. It helps us really get to mass customization. We have a online channel called classmateshop.com where you can personalize the notebook. That business model works because I work with the ecosystem who manage the infrastructure for classmateshop.com, and there is a last mile delivery. Without that, it would not be possible. We have created an entirely new business writing on the startup ecosystem. We have, an enormous food aggregator and delivery platform. So we brought the capabilities of FMCG, that is our foods business, and hotels together, and created a new cloud kitchen business, which we call, food tech. So completely new business created out of it. We were able to create ITC Mars because we got a lot of agri-tech solutions that were available, but they had to reach the farmers. We also have a lot of fintech players. We have, of course, the public digital infrastructure. All that helped us create ITC Mars, which is on one hand bringing efficiency to the farmer, but it's also creating a business model on its own for ourselves, because it's an integrated solution for farmers. So it's a multi-dimensional, as you can see, interface. And as far as scalability is concerned, there are in particularly, let me give you an example in D2C space. There are few areas that may remain completely online, but our belief is that most of it to scale up, because still, the predominant channel of consumptions are offline in India. So for most products to scale up, it has to be an omni-channel play. So that is where, the creativity of the founders comes in, whether with the product and the tech stack they develop, and then either partnering or acquisition by FMCG companies, because we provide the platform for that to be scaled up, like what we have done with Yoga Bar. So we provide the omni-channel network. The founder is there for several years after that, and ultimately, exist. So as you can see, there are many dimensions in which startups and corporates can collaborate for mutual benefit. And I think it's a lot of good work is being done to strengthen, corporate India, besides all that you're doing directly as contributors to the economy.
Just wanted to add only one comment to what Sanjeev said. I think he covered it in the last. But if I look at our own experience of working with startups, I think we had about 14 to 15 quote-unquote acqui-hire of startups, starting from very small ones to very large ones. And I think the real advantage you get is in aligning the strategic objectives. Obviously, if somebody wants to go on their own and is looking only at a funding, then I think for a corporate to invest is a very different view. It can be a customer. But where there is a clear alignment of strategic objectives, then I think it becomes a perfect fit. But I don't know, they won't unfortunately get recognized as unicorns, but they are very much part of that unicorn when it comes to creating the value for the larger corporate.
No, fantastic comments there. And Dinesh, is the last question for you, and then for the rest of the panel that I'll ask. I think startups have set up massive global ambition, and you have taken the company global. And I always wonder, how did you manage to do the CII role and the IPO in the same year, and many startups are going IPO as well. So I want your advice on both the topics. I think one, what is your secret sauce on time management to be able to do so many things simultaneously, and also any advice on taking companies global?
Thank you. Let me take the second part of the question first, because that actually answers the first one better. I think what really happens is, at least take the business I was in, supply chain or logistics, I think it was very clear for us that you needed to build a global moat to be successful in India as well. Therefore, it was, I would say, necessity which made us go global rather than, I would call it, any other choice. But as we did that journey, we realized that there is a significant advantage of, I would call it, better customer acceptance, better respect with the way in which we deal with customers, of being just an Indian, especially a supply chain company, to being a global supply chain company. As you do that, you very quickly realize that while in a way I could call myself the founder, you had to give up and make sure that you put the checks and balances, you put the correct structures, you put the correct set of people who can actually take the company forward. So as you did that, and I started stepping away more and more from being a hands-on person, as I joke, even today if you ask me, I will know maybe every new warehouse I won't know, but where operations are running and what is happening, but I won't really know today in terms of what's happening today there. So as you step away from that, I think it also helps you develop the dispassion to also look at that business more from other metrics which the rest of the corporate world will be looking at. And then that comes to the first part of the question, that gives you the time to do other things. But also I think for me it's a very important that I enjoy what I do, and I genuinely believe that taking on this role was something which I felt was important for me to have a better understanding of what opportunities arise for not just businesses but the country in itself, and support and make that happen.
No, fantastic, and thanks a lot, Dinesh, for a continuous encouragement to startups. Going to Sanjeev, I think, Sanjeev, there is this bold vision that has been created. What is that one or two things that you would like to see from both the CII Unicorn Forum or from startups, how we can leverage more DPIIT, or things that you would want to hear from us to make this ecosystem even larger?
Thank you. First thing which we will like from unicorns are that you all are role models. Each of the startup in your particular segment is aware about you. They look up to you for guidance. So DPIIT has a portal known as Mark, which gives opportunity to mentor the startups, and we are going to take it up in a big way. And I'm very happy to say that it was beyond our imagination that Honorable Minister Sir had a Unicorn Summit, and after that I wrote personal letters to all the unicorns, and I was actually surprised by the eagerness of the whole unicorn ecosystem to come and mentor our budding startups. And actually, not only Mark, we had requested for participating in Open Network for Digital Commerce. I am also looking after ONDC, and actually this is a very good scope for all kind of startups, whether big or small, to take the benefit. It is voluntary and it is picking up very fast, and we are very happy with the numbers. But the network will grow when there is active participation from all unicorns, startups. So that is my request, that participate in ONDC network, become mentors. And one more, and the last thing, that as Kant Sahib said, it is dream of every startup participant that our ecosystem should be the biggest. It should be the number one, and believe me, it is. What is lacking, that it has not been mapped, it is not at one place, and through startup ecosystem registry, we are trying to bring all the constituents at one place, and it will be my sincere and humble request to each one of you to become part of our, in fact, it is everyone's ecosystem registry. And I will also like to invite each one of you for a startup Mahakumbh, which is being done for the first time in India, where more than 1,000 startups, almost 1,500 startups are coming. If unicorns come and they simply just visit the stalls, and if they talk to them, it will be a lot of motivation for them, and it will be mutually beneficial for everyone. Many of you are already participating, but for the rest of you, if anybody is interested, we will be very happy to extend all kind of cooperation. Even we will try to have speaking slot or anything, because it is, we understand in the government that you have much, much more power in driving the system rather than government. It is, we are giving the background support. For example, if we come out with the deep tech policy and almost 1 lakh crore, which is $12 billion, support will be there. But it is the ecosystem which will drive the benefit of that money and the policy which is being created. So we will request that everyone to participate in Startup Mahakumbh. Thank you.
No, fantastic, Sanjeev. And every time I interact with you, there is so much encouragement and passion that you demonstrate towards the startup and newer ideas stemming from it. Sanjeev, I think it was great to hear. I mean, the number of innovations that you're already partnering and working with startups, it's heartening to see. But as we grow this ecosystem, love to have your own secret sauce or piece of advice for startups that you would want to give, and also how CII can play an important role in creating a platform from policy advocacy perspective as we grow the ecosystem.
So, you know, I think if you look at what startups have brought to the table, I think is a disruptive thinking. It's leveraging a lot of technology, challenging status quo, not merely through digital solutions, even you know, you spoke about manufacturing. Even, you know, you have startups making robotics and so on and so forth. You know, robotics has become more accessible in India because given the cost factors in India, imports never made it so much, automation was never so viable. It's become viable because of startups. So technology, disruptive thinking, I think those are the strengths that startups bring on the table. I think where legacy businesses can contribute in the development of startups is by, you know, areas of governance. You know, governance is a general word. What is governance? It's nothing to be, how do you kind of govern yourself for scalability? It is not just about processes, it's also about values, it's also about how do you, you know, process of delegation. How do you make sure as you scale up, and you know, as you scale up, you touch many more things in society and you're faced with many more compliance and regulatory requirements. So how do you make that a light touch and easy to do? I think if you were talking about, say, a consumer-facing startup, then there is, I think, areas that we can, you know, kind of exchange information and share with us, share with startups on our learnings, are the area of, you know, brand management, areas of how do you kind of test out a product, how do you kind of apply some of the traditional principles of testing out a product before you actually put it in the market. So these are some of the areas, I think, where members of CII can help and contribute by sharing our wisdom that we have learned over the decades, and contributes towards scalability and enable the startup ecosystem to thrive even much more than it has been doing in the past. And that's what we've tried to do with the people that we, you know, partner with, collaborate with. It's in completely open access. We provide them access to whatever resources we have, and do kind of try and pass on our knowledge, that institutional knowledge that we have acquired over the period of time.
Fantastic. Thank you. So with that, we conclude the session, but we have, I'll request everyone to stay on the dais. We have a couple of more unicorns to be felicitated.
Yes, now we have the privilege of felicitating a new set of remarkable unicorns whose contributions have left an indelible mark on the entrepreneurial landscape. So without further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to each unicorn as they grace the stage to receive this well-deserved recognition. And I will invite upon some of you, Mr. Sri Sanjeev, to do the honors for the first three unicorns. Rahul Rotela from Fire, celebrating world's first and only sustainable unicorn born out of India. Fires committed to building a sustainable future through technology. I think our second, Sanjay Kirimanjeshwar from Amagi, recognizing Amagi as a trailblazer in cloud technology, driving unparalleled growth and success, fueling the evolution of streaming worldwide. Sandeep Datta from Fractal Analytics. Fractal's presence in the AI space marks a paradigm shift, ushering in a new era of data-driven decision-making and disruptive growth in the industry. Prakashan Manikot from Lead Squared. Lead Squared has revolutionized sales and marketing with its hyper-automation platform and building self-reliant sales organizations. Gaurav Khetan from LiveSpace. Recognizing LiveSpace for their visionary contribution, pioneering unparalleled interior design excellence in the home interior and innovation space. Mr. Prateek Maheshwari and Alak Pandey, co-founder PhysicsWala. Kudos to PhysicsWala's game-changing role in the Indian edtech space, democratizing education with top-tier resources, fostering inclusivity and opportunity. May I request Mr. R. Dinesh to give away this award. Amit Chadha from Purple. Revolutionizing the beauty landscape, Purple emerged as India's disruptor in the online beauty realm. Alex Koshi from Unifor, commemorating Unifor for pioneering enterprise AI solutions in the conversational automation technology space. And before we conclude the session, may I request President CII to present the mementos to Mr. Abhiraj Bal and Rahul Garg, who are leading the Unicorns initiative for CII. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for all the winners and all the people who have been recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated, remain with us. We have one last fireside chat coming up. We close the session now. As soon as we've turned the table around and set the stage, we'll start with the last session. I think we are all set to begin with the next session, ladies and gentlemen. As we move forward in our program tonight, we are about to embark on a thought-provoking chat that explores the journey from to IPO. We have a stellar panel of experts joining us, each with a wealth of experience and insights to share. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists, Alok Bajpai, co-founder of Ixigo. Who's renowned for revolutionizing travel search in India with innovative technology solutions. Ashish Kumar, the dynamic co-founder and general partner at Fundamentum, is renowned for his strategic insights and investment prowess. With a proven track record of nurturing startups to reach their full potential, he embodies the spirit of entrepreneurial mentorship and growth. I now invite Bipin Preet Singh, the visionary founder of MobiKwik, who has been instrumental in revolutionizing digital payments in India. With his innovative approach and entrepreneurial spirit, he has led MobiKwik to become one of the leading fintech companies in the country, driving financial inclusion and digital empowerment for millions. And moderating this panel, we have Mr. Abhiraj Singhal, Chairman of the CII Unicorn Forum and co-founder Urban Company. Please join us on stage. And of course, Rahul Garg, who will also be a part of the panelists. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for staying on for this session. I'd like to extend a warm welcome and thanks to Bipin, Alok, and Ashish for joining us for this fireside chat. You know, it's a Unicorn Summit, so it's important to have unicorns on the stage as well and hear from them about their journey. And we'll try to keep this session candid, and we'll try and ask the three gentlemen on the stage some hard questions, some difficult questions, try and learn from their experience. I'm going to start with Bipin first. Bipin, you have been in the ecosystem now for close to more than a decade. And when we look at MobiKwik today, it is a very successful digital payments app, very successful in lending, I believe 15 to 20 million monthly active customers, but the journey has not been a straight line. And it's very important for entrepreneurs listening in to realize that it's never a straight line. There are ups and downs, and that's what creates resilience. So tell us about maybe a couple of instances in the journey when you saw difficult times, and how did that help you become more resilient as a founder and make MobiKwik what it is today?
Thank you. Thanks, Abhiraj. And great to be here at the CII Unicorn Summit. And you guys we've put in a great show so far. So really pleased to be here. The question that you asked, you know, I can answer for 1 hour. I don't think I'll be able to cover all the difficult situations that we have overcome. And I would say that's probably true for all startups. I think there are many lows and very few highs. The lows are all private, the highs are all public. But I think, you know, what you learn through these situations is the ability to first survive and then evolve and then grow. And I think one of the big things that has stayed with me over the last 10-15 years is overall the Indian market, especially the way it has grown. When we started, there was no Android, there were no smartphones, there was no iOS, and we started on the web, and we are talking about Gen AI right now. So the world has changed quite a bit. I think the reason why we've been successful and we have seen so many boom and bust cycles is simply because, you know, we have adapted, and we have built our business brick by brick, laid the foundations. Whether it is changes in the regulation, whether it is changes in market structure, whether it is changes in the competitive dynamics, we have seen it all. And the only reason we have survived and thrived, and today we are a profitable company, a large profitable company in the fintech space, is basically only because we have looked at how to serve India and how to create financial inclusion at scale. And even after doing this for more than a decade, I am so bullish about India and so bullish about the fintech opportunity per se, and I want to spend 1 minute talking about that, is simply because, in India, we've created so much progress in the last, especially in the last 5 to 7 years, in terms of digital public infrastructure, in terms of digital identity, the stack that has been created, UPI, digital payments, everybody knows about it. But still, in this country, the number of people who have access to credit is so less. It's probably less than 10%. It's 7 to 8%. The number of people who have access to good financial advice in terms of where they can invest or what asset classes they should put money in is probably less than 5%. Probably 5% people, less than 5% people even invest in stock markets. So we've created bank accounts, we've created digital ecosystem, but we are far from creating an ecosystem which is democratic in terms of access to financial products. And that's what keeps me going. I think the next 10 years are going to be even more exciting. And I do think there will be challenges along the way. We heard about a lot of challenges, from the previous panelists, especially around compliance, around governance, that all startups have to look at. But I think it's how you assess the progress of your own company and the needs of the market and the needs of the customers is the way you can adapt. And that's what we've been doing.
Thank you very much. That's very, very comprehensive and brilliantly answered. I'll now come to you, Ashish. For those of you in the audience who may not be aware, prior to becoming an investor, Ashish has had over a decade of experience as a founder and an operator CEO. So he's one of the few in the ecosystem who's been on the other side and knows the challenges of building a company and operating the company. And I think it's very important that we have more like you in the venture capital ecosystem. Ashish, from your perspective, obviously when you're making an investment, you're not making it thinking about what's hot today or what's the theme today. You're thinking what will become big 5 to 7 to 8 years out, because that's the typical gestation period for your return. Tell us a couple of questions. One, tell us 2, 3 opportunities or sectors that you're excited by, where you think you have slightly contrarian view to what the rest of the ecosystem is chasing. That's one. And the second is, you're investing in a very early stage of the investment cycle. Company is certainly not proven. So in many ways, you're backing the founder. What are the couple of traits that you look for in that founder or founding team when you back them?
Yeah, thank you, Abhiraj. I thought when I looked at the names of all the panelists on this panel, I thought it's a very friendly panel, and I am actually happy that the question is also pretty friendly, at least to begin with. Maybe before I answer the question, Abhiraj, that you spoke about, I'll tell you that I started my at least career working with one of the large companies, software company in the US, Microsoft, right? This is almost 20 years back. And when I came back to India, this is almost 19, 20 years back, right? After working there for 3 years. The number of companies that we were starting was probably in the either 2-digit number or early three-digit numbers, right? And India, of course, we have come a long way in that. But when I look at the entire ingenuity of the Indian founders, right, and that was one of the questions that Abhiraj asked, that what do we look for in the founders? I think, and this was the point I think Mr. Kant was also kind of making, or Sanjeev Bikhchandani is also making, that, as a country, we have been very entrepreneurial, right? It's just that the medium, the kind of businesses that people are starting are kind of changing, right? I would probably think that the medium, effectively, people like us, started to create technology entrepreneurs, started maybe in true sense around 10, 12 years back. This is when kind of Make My Trip went public, and that is when people saw that not only can we start businesses, but also, create and capture value there, right? So number one, what do we look for in entrepreneurs? Effectively, number one is that people who can build businesses for the next 10, 15, 20 years. You know, like investors, of course, would come in, probably they would look for exit after a time, which is 5 to 7 years, 10-year time period. But as businesses, as entrepreneurs, do you truly want to build this business for the next 10, 20, 30 years of your life, right? I think serial entrepreneurs are, you know, a little, I think, given too much of weightage than what should be given. And it probably, the concept works a lot more in the West, right? Because their markets, some of those markets are a lot more deeper and the ecosystem is a lot more mature, right? We as a country are probably getting there. So the first point is that, do you want to build this business for a long period of time, right? So are you doing this just because money is available, or are you doing this because this is your kind of passion? Second point that we look at is, you know, whenever you look at disruption, right, you know, you have to effectively look at any problem from a first principle basis. You know, when you are looking at a problem from a first principle basis, can you really, you know, demystify how the industry works, look at how it should work in a way that you could create a large market share, right? A lot of technology businesses are all about kind of creating large market shares. Like this is exactly what Abhiraj has done, Rahul has done as well, right? How do you do that? That's the second point. And the third, and probably one of the more important things that gets slightly less talked about, little more openly, is how do you create teams and incentivize them to, you know, if not necessarily 10, 20 years, you know, to be with you for the next 5 to 10 years, right? So if you are able to do so, and if you are able to identify that, I think everything honestly else is kind of secondary, right? Because businesses change, businesses evolve, but it's very important for people to continue to be there. Now, some of the thesis, and absolutely what Abhiraj was saying, that, you know, we have to look at, honestly, some kind of crystal ball gazing, thinking that how will the world look like in the next 5, 7, 8 years. Honestly, it is not even 5, 7 years. It is almost 10, 15 years, because we probably will sell in 5 to 7 years, but whoever is buying this will also look at the next 5 to 7 years. We have to look at almost the next 10 to 15 years, right? And you have to look at basic, consumption patterns and see where the world is moving. So one of the things that at least we talk about in our fund is that everyone has to spend time every year for people who are in their early 20s. Because if you are particularly investing in, early stage businesses, right, a lot of these guys who will ensure that the businesses become large, are the people where these people will be in their 20s and they will continue to use this application or the product or the offering for the next 10, 15, 20 years of their life. So that's one that we kind of talk about. I think manufacturing has been talked about a lot more in India, and I think one of the contrarian bets that at least we are looking at is that, is there a way for us to look at more technology bets in kind of manufacturing? At India in general, if you look at a lot of publicly listed companies, many of them have B2B manufacturing bent, right? It is ironical that in the last 10, 15 years, we did not invest in many of those companies, primarily because if you look at a lot of the venture capitalists, when they came in India, many of them came from the US, and it was easier for them to understand, or people to understand how businesses look like, the technology businesses look like in the US, and kind of copy it there. I think that is changing, right? So we, as an example, are a fully homegrown fund, and we are not the only one. There are probably 8 to 10, 15 more funds, and there are more in the making, right? So those are some of the areas that I'll probably talk about.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, Ashish. I'll now come to Alok. Alok, you've created a remarkable company, particularly because in your category, not just today, from very early days, there were many, many giants. Listed companies, global companies, companies with deep pockets. And for me, Ixigo represents a company that has been able to win in its space and create a presence for itself at the back of, one, a great product, and two, lots of frugal innovations. Lots of frugal innovations. In fact, a book can be written about your frugal marketing itself. So tell us, this journey of frugal innovation, frugal marketing, competing with the Goliaths as a David, what have you learned in this journey, and how have you created that culture within Ixigo till date?
Sure.
So first of all, congrats to you and Rahul for creating a great forum here. We enjoyed the day today. And I just want to build upon what Ashish said because it's related to what you asked. See, if we want to think about the next 10 years for India in consumer internet, the kind of solutions we'll need to build will need to be very Indian. Right, so if we go back to the era when I started, and by the way, when I started 3 months prior to that, I landed up in his office and asked him how to register a company because he was, he's one generation ahead that way, and I think we've actually discovered over the last 10 years that look, companies that were essentially aping Western consumer internet models on India and in our space, more of saying, okay, I'll launch with serving for flights and hotels. You quickly realize that the kind of consumer coming online is very different in terms of what they want, right? Because this is no more the India internet when we started. When we started, there were like 12 to 15 million internet users. Broadband was expensive. Only rich people could afford it. These were the same people who could fly or book hotels, right? And the unique insight we developed over time as we saw the market change. And we are living in a very unique market where I don't think the pace of change anywhere in the world today is comparable to what we are seeing in India when it comes to disruption, whether it's in terms of underlying platforms. You had Jio, then you had UPI, and you will have more. You have ONDC coming, etc. So you always have something new to look forward to ride on. But also about how a new class of consumers is coming online from tier 2, 3 towns, from aspiring middle class, what we call India 2. So India 1 is this 50 million users, which, you know, I think the first 10 years most companies were trying to target. But what you're seeing now is India 2 becoming, you know, the dominant target for everyone for growth. And the reason is simple, that you look at any category, you pick travel, the next 100 airports are coming up in not just tier 2 towns, tier 3 towns, right? Places like Bareilly, Ayodhya, Darbhanga, Jharsuguda, these places have airports today, right? 6, 7 years ago, they didn't. And I think the writing is on the wall on where growth for any category in internet is going to come from. But the problem is that solutions that were built with the Western lens, right, are probably going to need to go down to the fundamentals, and we talked about building from first principles. I'd say you have to go down to the level of understanding that consumer from their lens, grounds up their needs. And we have great examples sitting here. I mean, Abhiraj has built a great business identifying very uniquely Indian problems, you know, and solving them in with unique Indian insights, right? And so has Rahul, right? And so has MobiKwik as well. I mean, the fact is that if you want to build a long-term sustainable business, and this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? So the objective in your mind should be clear that it's, and Sanjeev said it beautifully, that it's not about building a unicorn in a year or two, but it's about, you know, building it in a way where you can sustain, right? So I think we are living in a time where it's harder to stay a unicorn than to build one, right? So, and I think the learning there is, look, if you can crack that problem with patience, understanding the real consumer insights on the ground, and it will need all of us to spend more time in you know, with the consumer, understanding their needs, then you can really build a very deep solution for India that is harder to disrupt by any global company if they ever try to approach this market, or even by the large incumbents who might be more focused on a different class of consumers, right, or with a very different product proposition. And the frugality that you talked about, I mean, it only comes from not being able to raise money in the early days, you know, and, you know, thankfully, we didn't become a unicorn in the early days, or we wouldn't be this frugal. I think the fact that when you don't have enough and you're pushed up against the wall, you have to come up with something that helps you survive and grow. It sort of forces innovation internally. And we've always thought of it like that, saying that, look, we might not have anything. I mean, in terms of resources or financing or in terms of scale, always looked like it was hard to catch up to the incumbent. But, you know, today I think in terms of what we have done with very little capital, you know, we're very happy because we ended up doing things in a way which are harder to copy by someone who throws money at it, right? Because I think it's easier to scale by throwing money at problems. It's harder to build deep product customer experience, unique insights, and new solutions for a new class of consumers. These problems are much harder. And over time, that moat becomes more deeper because you have a very unique insight about a unique part of the market. So I would say that we were just lucky that we failed so many times and we've been going through so many near-death moments in the past that it just built resilience and it built the ability to continue. And you know, I think over time you discover that just staying is winning.
Very well put, Alok, very well put. Bipin, I want to come back to you and I want to double click on something you said. You said that there's a huge gap in the lending offered to a wide array of Indians, particularly MSMEs and in the retail space. And there's something we have known for a while, like 60-65% of MSME lending needs are either not met or met through informal channels. Banks and NBFCs have not been able to penetrate that. So what is differentiated or what is different now with players like yourself and the new age fintechs that they're able to do what, you know, with the mammoth infrastructure available and the mammoth balance sheets available to the banks and the NBFCs, they are not able to do?
So I think, you know, the major change that has happened in the last several years, as we know, is the infrastructure that is available and the users who have gotten used to using digital infrastructure, which has exponentially increased the reach of financial products and reduced the ticket size, whether it is loans, whether it is insurance, whether it is just pure investments or any kind of savings. Today you can buy gold digitally at 10 rupees. You can invest in mutual funds at 100 rupees. You can take a loan as low as 5,000 rupees as a pay later loan, which we provide at MobiKwik. And of course you can do digital payments as low as 1 rupees, 5 rupees. So this kind of business never made sense for any traditional bank or financial institutions. If we look at the history of evolution of banking worldwide, but more specifically even in India, banks were created for corporates, not for retail customers. It is only later that they realized, okay, there are also users who may want bank accounts. And that's what happened. And in India, all the banks were, of course, owned by the government. They were public sector banks. And then liberalization happened, and then we got private sector banks. And you've seen the success of private sector banks in the last 20 years, 30 years, in terms of market cap, in terms of the service that they can provide, the array of products suited for each class of customers. But even they have concentrated nearly at the top. Like what Alok was saying, there was so much opportunity just to serve people living in Delhi and Bangalore and Mumbai and all these places, that there was no need to go to a place which is 100 kilometers from here. But the reality is, if you go 100 kilometers from any big, large city in India, you can't go walk into a bank branch and just get a loan or even open an account or do any kind of financial product. You will be just shooed away, right? I mean, so that continues to be the reality, but thanks to digital infrastructure, that same person can now come on an app and they can actually open an account. They can open a wallet with MobiKwik and start making payments. Using that history, they can start getting access to a very small loan, even if they don't have a credit history, because nobody has ever given them a loan. So remember, if you want to underwrite them using a credit bureau, they have no track record. But you know that they make purchases or they make some bill payments, they do some recharges, they shop online, they do some kind of things online. Based on that activity, you give them a loan. Now, as they grow, they earn more money. Many of these people who work, for example, your partners, like at Urban Company, their economic situation improves. Now they're looking at saving money because they have never been advised that you also need to save money and save for a rainy day. Because most of us, at least most of India, has always lived, paycheck to paycheck and not even in a formal ecosystem. So this habit of savings is also getting developed where you can actually look at different products, whether it's gold, mutual funds, any kind of new interesting products, you can start saving money. So like this, basically banking is reaching the masses. It's reaching India 2 and it's also reaching India 3. And that opportunity is, I think it's maybe 1 to 2% addressed. And that is why today, because the penetration of smartphones and digital networks smartphone has gone up so much that I actually believe right now it's an inflection moment where a lot of the penetration of financial products will just scale up over the next 10 years.
Ashish, coming to you, this is a little bit of a personal question for you. Entrepreneurs turn VCs, typically they make more empathetic VCs because they've seen the journey as entrepreneurs and operators. But there's also a risk of backseat driving. When you're seeing that the founder is making obvious mistakes which you have made in the past, how are you able to avoid this urge, if at all? You have been on the boards of many successful companies like Spinny, Farmeasy, Wishlink now, which is doing amazingly well. What do you do in that situation where you're seeing that the entrepreneur is making an obvious mistake and you can stop him or her? What are your thoughts around this?
Great question. I think the operator bias is real, right? A lot of times in our jobs, we meet people and then we are just amazed by the quality of entrepreneur and quality of thinking that the person comes in with, right? And then you are you are mesmerized, and then those are the companies you typically end up kind of backing, right? At the same time, during portfolio, you almost feel like that, hey, this is a mistake I have made, or this is a mistake I have seen people make. Why are you doing it, right? What I've realized over a period of time is two things. One is that whether we like it or not, everyone will make their own mistakes, and we will have to honestly let them do that a little bit. Our job, honestly, is to kind of tell them that, hey, this is one way of doing things. There are probably 4 ways of doing things, right? So the presenting options and letting them choose is the probably only thing that we want to do, right? If you try to do anything else, instead of trying to be helpful, we'll probably kind of be causing damages to those startups. So that's something that I've kind of realized over a period of time. And when I was making that shift, Abhiraj, from entrepreneur to a VC, right? It was a depressing moment for the first 6 months because I just could not understand, hey, how do I do this, right? Primarily because if you look at, as an entrepreneur, you do all this maths on your Excel sheet and then it makes money, right? As a VC, when you look at Excel sheet and you start putting numbers, you said, no, this is not making money, right? How do you do that, right? So this is, so we have to understand what our job is, right? And then if you look at typically very successful investors, right? What will happen is that they are too much in their mind, right? Because ours is not really an operational job. So if you look at a lot of VCs becoming health conscious, starting to run marathons and so on and so forth, that's exactly the humility to understand that we can do beyond a point, right? Our job is to choose the right founder and build our own skills in a way that they continue to feel that they have to listen to us, right? So it's honestly it's a very interesting and tough job from that perspective. So just imagine somebody like a Rahul or Abhiraj is sitting on the board and you have to effectively be able to be their thought partners, right? It's not easy. And I have to admit that as an entrepreneur, what also happens is that in many rooms, you are usually the smartest person in the room, right? As a VC, if you are the smartest person in the room, you clearly have done a bad job, right, at choosing, right? So you have to be very, very careful of that and have to understand that. So I think it takes a while, like takes maybe a year or two, right, if you are a sharp kind of learner. And then after that, you become a little more relaxed about it.
Yeah, I'm reminded of what, one of the VCs on my board, sort of, who I respect a lot, says. He says, I have to remind myself that inaction is sometimes my biggest action in these situations.
Like, at least I tell Abhiraj that, as a VC, our job is not to come up with our version of the world, right? Our job is to either agree or disagree with the founder and just present options, right? Don't try to get into your intellectual stimulation. This is how it should look like, because just primarily because you are not close enough to that market that is being addressed or disrupted.
Very true, very true. Last question to you, Alok. Again, a slightly personal question. You've been at it for a while, almost 15 years now, and you're at the cusp of going public. We wish you, a tremendous and successful public listing in the near future. The clock is almost going to reset, right? Going to go back to zero. All the trust that you've earned in the ecosystem amongst your investors, we all know you a certain way. The public market is now going to judge you from scratch. You have to go at the grind again for perhaps another 10, 15 years. What's your mental frame right now? How are you thinking about this? How are you keeping your sanity? Tell us a little bit more at the personal level, what are you going through?
So I think the first time when we interacted with public market investors, which was in 2021, after spending a lot of time with them, we realized that the way they were thinking about what they value in a company and how companies need to be built, and the way we have been actually building it in the last 10 years is not very different. And I think Sanjeev also hinted on it an hour ago. I think fact is that, look, what public markets believe in is trust, right, in governance. If a company says they'll do something and they actually do it or beat it, you get rewarded. If a company says they'll do something and you don't do it or do something else, your stock gets punished. Now, ideally, it should work the same way in private markets, but in private markets, once Ashish has made an investment, he has to sit and wait for many, many years and live with the mistakes the company is making. And, and maybe if governance is wrong, he'll put his hand up and say, hey, what the hell are you doing? But here, there's an instant feedback loop, right? It takes seconds for people to give feedback on what you're doing and how they perceive it. A lot of it has to do with communication, because if you communicate your story well, and if you communicate why you're doing what you're doing and, how people expect the future to look like, and you manage expectations in a way where you don't overcommit and underdeliver, history has proven that companies that did that actually did well, right? What that means is that a startup should think of going public only when the governance is in place. And when you say governance, independent board, Big Four auditor, processes, closing your financials. We close it like by the 10th of every month, and, having a quarterly sort of board review of your financials within a certain timeline, and following the norms that every listed company follows. So we converted from private limited to public limited 2.5 years ago. So most of the norms that apply to public companies actually apply also to public limited companies. They're just not listed, right? So we've been sort of running that treadmill now for 2.5 years. But the learning really is it brings a lot of discipline in the team, because when you're a startup, the priority is growth and chasing your short-term targets, right? As you mature, that moves to being able to build a more sustainable institution, which is governed by predictability, right? Like, can I actually predict the next quarter or the next 1 year, in a way where I can I can have more confidence when I say I'll do something, right? When you're raising your Series A round, I'm pretty sure if you go back and look at your spreadsheets, you know, most people will have a very, very optimistic way of the future. Like they'll say, okay, I'll build $1 billion company in 4 years and then I'll IPO and then, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, the fact is that most companies that went public took 10 years or more to actually build anything meaningful. That's okay. You know, I think that enthusiasm is fine. But I think once you're in the public markets, your guidance quarter on quarter, year on year, you know, needs to be very accurate. And the only way to ensure that is the systems and processes, bring in a great CFO, the corporate governance, not just the board, but also everyone in your team needs to build sensitivity for doing things in the right way all the time, right? Like there is no, you know, when you're starting and you're doing things, there are certain things where you say, okay, it's okay, let's do it right now, we'll figure out later. Here's like, let's figure out first and then let's do it, right? So I think that's the difference it has created for us in how we operate. Now, the good news is that if your company is able to show profitable growth, right, and build that consistency where you are able to build a, you know, let's say not 100%, but let's say 90% accurate view of how you're going to trend, I think then you're ready, right? I mean, that's the point where anybody who's considering to go public, you know, I'm hoping at least 4 companies on this panel will at some point, right? 2 have already filed, obviously, but basically, you know, you have to make sure that your team is aligned on this, because when we are chasing growth, the team is chasing growth, right? And when you're chasing profitable growth, is very different, because now you're telling people, okay, I want to increase my EBITDA and not my revenue, right? So not just my revenue. It's harder. It's a cultural shift, right? But you have to make that cultural shift before you get to that finish line.
Thank you, Alok. And ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for all 3 of them. They've spoken with a lot of candor, a lot of heart. I had not shared the questions with them prior to this discussion. So, but I really appreciate, gentlemen, your thoughts and your ideas and sharing them with us and coming here today. Thank you so much. Please stay on.
Thank you, Abhiraj. And we have with us Samir Chugh from Games 24/7, who was not here earlier in the evening when the unicorns were being recognized, but he's here with us now. May I request Rahul to kindly felicitate him. He is from Games 24/7, and here we recognize his organization as a pioneering force in India's online gaming landscape. May I request Rahul to now please give his closing remarks and close the session, please.
Firstly, thanks everyone for being a fantastic audience, and thanks to all the panelists who have been sharing their immense experience, as well as to the McKinsey team, which I think over the last 6 months we had an opportunity to partner and really come out with insights that sometimes we as founders were not aware of, in terms of the contribution to the GDP and the jobs being created as part of the startup ecosystem. I would say that this is just a beginning of efforts which we are starting as the CII Unicorn Summit. And in this process, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Chris Gopalakrishnan, Abhiraj Bahl, the chairperson, Madhu, Bhuma, and the entire CII team for their unwavering support and dedication to making this happen. From the McKinsey team, individuals working on this report, Rajat Dhawan, who has been like the champion and sponsor, Ramados Sitaraman, Nikhil Vyas, Kaushal Kabra, for their sheer effort in developing this report. I also want to thank, I think, the extended team of Moglis, Nupur and Sugandha, as well as extended team of Urban Company, Bhavya, who have been also working behind the scenes to make this a success. Thank you once again. May this evening be filled with inspiration, celebration, and entrepreneurial spirit that defines our nation. We will continue this journey. This is just the beginning. I am sure there will be many more such events, opportunities where we will continue to debate how can we make this ecosystem larger, bigger, and there is a grand vision of how do we create $1 trillion impact as unicorns in the country over the next 7 to 10 years. So thank you. With this, all of you are invited for the dinner outside, and
Thank you, Rahul. And a big round of applause. I want this louder, please, for both of them and all our great eminent speakers and all the unicorns and the startups that have been a part of this. Yes, like Rahul said, I invite you all for dinner. But before that, I also want to tell you that for all of you who would like to carry home a report, a copy of the hard copy, it is available on the reception outside at the registration table. Please do carry it out with you. Dinner is in the lawns outside. As you step out, move to your right, and please do join us for dinner. Thank you everyone for a lovely evening. Have a great evening.